Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Paula Lettuce. I am the president and the board chair of Mount Vernon at Home here in Alexandria, Virginia. Our village is located on the land that George Washington used to have as part of his estate. I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves. Peter, I think you're the only one. Thank you. Barbara asked me to do this presentation because I've been through a few transitions here in our village. I started off as a volunteer driver. After I retired, I was looking for things to keep myself a little busy. And I started off as a driver, and then our village created something called the Friends of the Village, which is now our associate member category. And there were two of us who were co-chairs of that group. We were given positions on the board. A year later, I was the vice president. I'm now in my second year as the president of the board. And I have 1 year remaining in my board service. We limit our board members to 2 consecutive 3-year terms. A little bit of my background, so you can put it in perspective. I'm a retired senior Fed. I work for the Department of Navy and the Department of State. And then after that, I was the executive director of a science society, which was a 501c3. So I got my feet wet a little bit on that from the inside, but I'd already been serving on some nonprofit boards, and we'll get into a little bit about board membership a little later in the presentation. We're going to talk about the challenge of when your CEO, your executive director leaves, whether you call it an executive director, whether it's a volunteer or a paid position. Hopefully, the presentation and some of my suggestions and some samples that I provided at the end will help you. We'll do a question and answer at the end. Does everybody know how to record a question in the chat box as we go along? And then Barbara and I will monitor those at the end. So on your Zoom screen, you can, on the lower at the bottom, there should be chat. If you open that up, you can just type in your questions there, and then we'll address them at the end. I have to warn you, I am sipping water and sucking on cough drops. Got a cold on a trip last week, so I may have to mute myself occasionally to kind of clear my throat. So please be patient with me. Okay. Change is inevitable. That's obvious. Everyone hopes the ED will stay forever, or that the ED will leave on someone else's watch. That rarely ever happens. You don't have to worry. Someone else will help you figure it out. That's not true, especially for those of you that serve as board members or are considering being a board member. Change is going to happen. And one of your primary responsibilities as a board member, beside the fiduciary responsibility, is to hire an executive director, looking at what your organization needs, and then to select that person, train them, evaluate them, and retain them as your chief executive operating officer. One of the things, especially in the DC area, we have so many nonprofits here. No one stays forever in a position. A lot of the people who are in the senior leadership positions in nonprofits are retirees, and they're going to retire from as a second career. If you have some more junior people on your staff, people in their 20s and 30s, they will move quite often between organizations. And it may be that the mission of another nonprofit or another organization appeals to them. It may be a career enhancing position, so it's a slight promotion or it's a slight increase in their responsibilities. Some may just hop around the country, going from one job to another, excuse me, and they relocate. So somebody from DC could end up in the upper Northwest because they like that particular area. And nonprofit jobs are actually easier to find because compensation is rarely an issue. And then sometimes people look at nonprofit experience as a stepping stone to get back into the for-profit world. Okay, so what happens when somebody leaves? Depending on their longevity, there is a huge loss of institutional knowledge. Barbara Sullivan, who's the VTV executive director, was the executive director of Mount Vernon at Home for I believe 8 years. And when Barbara left, a lot of that knowledge walked out the door. And subsequently, we have had a couple of executive directors in the interim to where we are now. So my time on the board, I've had to deal with turnover. And over time, the ED, your chief executive officer, has developed a huge list of personal contacts. Some of them are related to the business of the village. Some of them are community leaders. Some of them are faith-based. Some of them are in the healthcare world. And that whole body of knowledge, that body of contacts and interrelationships literally is going to walk out the door. The financial stability of your village may be challenged. If somebody has had a personal relationship with your ED and they have been a major donor or a very consistent donor, the donor may want to wait till a new person gets on board and then look at that talent, that person, to see if they've got the confidence to continue to be a supporter, financial supporter of your organization, or a volunteer for that matter. And then there may be people that have made a pipeline or a commitment that over the next 10 years, I will donate $1,000 a year in your end of year campaign, or I will be a sponsor at $1,000 for your fundraiser. And that commitment may be misplaced because it's hard to document all of those on paper. Another thing that may happen in a turnover is there's a period of flux, and the mission of your village and the kinds of goals and objectives that you've had in place may be overlooked because, to save time, to concentrate on just basically getting through the day, providing support to your members. And that's a risk that may happen. And then if you've got staff, whether they're paid or volunteer, people may be concerned that in the absence of an executive director, other people will have to share in that responsibility. And it may affect their workload, and it may affect their family life, their other personal commitments. And then your sponsors, your long-term donors, your relationship with healthcare community or your faith-based community, those stakeholders may in fact become concerned. So where do you go? Where do you go from here? Anytime you have, and whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, anytime you have a leadership gap, it's a great time to step back and say, are we managing ourselves really, really well? Is this a time to do a critical self-analysis on what makes us tick? Do we have procedures in place? Are we meeting our mission? Does the train leave the station every day as it's supposed to and come home, return to the station at the end of the day? One of the key things, and I think this is the topic of one of the other breakouts, is governance, and it had to do with recruiting and identifying prospective board members. Is your governance defined? Do you have good bylaws? Do you have procedures in place? Do you have committees that are effective and working? Are there minutes of meetings? Are the bylaws realistic? Is your strategic plan realistic? Do you have tactical plans and action plans? The biggest issue is, are you financially healthy? And it's not just a matter of, is the income for a given year adequate to meet the expenses of that year? You need to have a reserve of some point. And yes, it is appropriate for nonprofits to have reserves. A lot of people believe that that's not the case, but nonprofits are supposed to have reserves. And that is extremely important when you are looking for exterior financing. You're not just living, table to, or grocery store to table, or whatever that saying is. So is your income predictable? Most nonprofits, their income either comes from dues or donations or fundraising. One of the things that also is important is, and I mentioned procedures already, you need to have very strong internal controls. Who records the deposits? Who has access to the checkbook? How is the mail opened? How do you deal with credit cards? And we had procedures here, but they were never committed to paper. And especially over the last couple of years, procedures were not as adhered to. So one of the things that we've done with our board over the last 2 years is to write a lot of procedures, and they're committed to paper. They're shared with the board members, and they're obviously shared with the staff and our executive director. And that's a part of how you evaluate how you're doing and how you evaluate the work that your staff is doing. Another issue is making sure the board is informed of all the critical issues facing your village. The board does not need to know what the executive director does every day, but the executive director needs to keep the board informed of workload issues, of exterior contacts, issues that come up, accomplishments over the time. The executive committee is the key to handling the more nitty-gritty issues. So the executive committee would do the evaluation of the ED. The executive committee, in our case, had to meet several times over the last few years when we had executive director turnover. One was not expected. It happened one day, and on Friday afternoon we had an ED, and on Saturday morning we did not. So we convened the executive committee immediately, worked on a strategy, and then informed the rest of the board. And then, obviously the question is, are your staff performing and functioning well? And is your volunteer structure doing the same? So from that, as kind of not to scare you, but the outline of what we're going to talk about today is, what are the circumstances that someone could leave? What are the critical issues? What are the roles and responsibilities? And how do you go down the path going forward? What you can do to prepare in advance, the questions and answers through the process, and then lessons learned and results. So why do people leave? It can be an involuntary separation. Somebody could become incapacitated, an illness, a major family upheaval. So there's nothing anybody could do about that. And it's obviously going to create a void. You may have a non-performance issue where your executive director is not performing the functions that you've asked he or her to perform. And it may just be, it's time to part ways. You need to have turnaround. Somebody could retire, and they could give you 6 months notice on a retirement. I'm sorry, I missed that. Turnaround's needed. That would be a change in your mission or change in the direction that your village is taking. Okay, then next, retirement. Somebody could give you 6 months notice or a year notice and saying, I plan on retiring on January 1st next year. Gives you lots of time to think about that. Somebody could give you notice that they're retiring in a month if they're supposed to give 4 weeks notice. They may just have not thought about it, have had a change of heart, and all of a sudden they're ready to walk out the door. And then you have resignations, anticipated and non-anticipated. So when somebody leaves involuntarily, it's up to the executive committee to basically take charge. If you've got staff, a personnel officer, which I doubt any village does, you should be consulting with that personnelist who has that specialty and the experience. And you should get legal counsel. We have been very fortunate with our village to get a major law firm in DC to serve on a pro bono basis. A lot of law firms have encouraged their partners to do pro bono work with nonprofits. and they are allotted a certain amount of hours and certain leeway of time that they could spend. It's a benefit to your village because you're getting outstanding legal counsel. It's also a benefit to the attorneys, the law firm, that they are involved in local work and supporting local causes. So we have worked with our legal counsel quite extensively over the last few years. You should have a meeting in person with your executive director. What has happened, and you need to document the date of their separation, whatever compensation is owed or not owed. Is there outstanding vacation time for which they need to be paid? What are the terms and the conditions of their separation? Is there a confidentiality statement? Is there a non-compete? The non-compete we've added recently to our paperwork. And again, we have worked with our legal counsel on all of this, sharing the circumstances of the departure and sharing with them drafts of the documentation that we've been preparing. You need to remove the access to any bank accounts or investment accounts immediately. Then you need to control the message. This is extremely important. You need to basically say, the person is leaving. We thank them for their service. Their last day is, and the board is embarked on identifying and hiring a new executive director. But the message has to be unified and the message has to be consistent. It's confidential. No matter what the reason is that somebody leaves, unless it's retirement, you need to control the circumstances of the departure. It is confidential. If the person has left on not good terms, it is confidential. The board speaks with one voice. The board speaks with one voice on budget. The board speaks with one voice on several issues, but this is one of the ones that is extremely critical, that the board speaks with one voice. So when the executive committee has done all of this work and documented it, consulted with legal counsel, you inform the rest of the board, then you inform the staff, you then inform the immediate stakeholders, and then you inform the general public. And one of the things that you should do is probably just do a little notice to other local nonprofits. So if somebody leaves voluntarily, their employment letter offering them the position and the compensation, if there is any, should have an advance notice that is given. So it's typically a month notice is given. You need to develop a transition plan. What are the continuing duties that they will be performing up to the day of their departure? You need to define anything else that's associated with transition, like working with other staff, completing a particular project, handling a project that might have been in the pipeline a month from now, but you would like it done before their departure. Most people who leave voluntarily, whether it's their retirement or to accept another job, if they're conscientious and they're dedicated to the mission of your organization, are willing to put in a lot more work on their transition. You need a data dump. All those things that are in the head of the departing ED, all those contacts, you just need to basically start meeting with people, meeting with your board chair, meeting with the staff, and doing a data dump. These are the things that I do. This is what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it. You need a list of all the contacts in one place. It may be having the ED go through their contacts list on their computer. It may be a directory on their desk where they keep contacts, but having everybody's name, what their organization is, their phone number, their email, and why they have that relationship with that person is really, really important. So it can be key members, it can be your key volunteers, it can be people in the community, it can be your donors, It could be your contractors, if you have work performed on a contract basis. You need to eliminate all access to the database, the bank accounts 1 day before the last day. And then it goes without saying, any office equipment that the person has, their keys to an office, any of the files that they have at home need to be returned and secured. And then when it's a voluntary separation, have a nice farewell for them. Thank them for their service, even if it was only 6 months. Thank them for their service. Okay, so before you start to do your recruiting, we mentioned this earlier, review your mission statement and your strategic plan. Are they still good? Chances are they're generic enough to remain in place, but it may be a time to refocus your goals. It may have to do with the services provided by your village. It may have to do with the size of your village in terms of its geographic boundaries. But this is the perfect time to do it, is that interim period. Even though you're struggling to get the work done and meet your member needs, this is a good time to do it, to step back and reassess where you are as a village. Go back and ensure that all those procedures are written. A good thing for the board to do is to take a look at all of those written procedures and say, what are we missing? Are there any topics that need to be addressed? Are they clear, and are they available to the appropriate people? Internal controls are extremely important. It's not just in the profit world. Internal controls are extremely important. Who opens the mail? Who records the check? Who does your accounting? Who has access to the member records? Because a lot of us have in our databases have particular information about our members. It could be health concerns. It could be some medical history. It could be their emergency points of contact. So all of those need to have procedures in place that protects privacy and protects the integrity of the organization. Again, the relevant contact list is reviewed and updated. If the ED says that the person that I deal with at the bank on our checking account, I know is leaving in 6 months, note that, make sure that that's noted so that the replacement person or the board acting on behalf of the ED has that information, that there may be turnover in all of those things. And again, there may be somebody on the executive committee or the board that says, do we have a contact at X? And if X is not on that list, and it should be, then it's a good time to do that revision to the contact list. There needs to be a place where all of the accounts, bank, investment accounts, and credit card accounts are listed in one place with the account numbers and all of the passwords associated with them and all the procedures associated with accessing those accounts. We have a checking account, we have a savings account, we have a CD, and we have one small investment account. And then we have a PayPal account where we use PayPal to run charges. So when members pay dues by charge, or we have donations that are done by credit card, or participation in our gala, those are all done by credit card and through our PayPal account. And then keep the board informed as you're going along. You don't need to do daily updates, but the board needs to understand that the executive committee is working on this transition period. So hiring a new ED. I'm a stickler about action plans. I write down on an Excel spreadsheet what the topic is, what the task is, and a target date and who's supposed to be working on it. It doesn't have to be that formal, but you need an action plan with assignments and target dates to ensure accountability and to make sure that things are being done on time and things are being done well. Hopefully everybody has a position description, a job description for their executive director in place, and you need to review that. You also should have a performance plan for your executive director. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in excruciating detail, but ours talks about membership recruitment and retention. Ours talks about outreach and increasing our donor base. Our performance plan talks about increasing our base of volunteers. So you need to review the performance plan and write a new one to update what's there already and to look at what the future goals and priorities are of the organization. You need, even though you may have a person that says, I've got someone who's absolutely perfect for this job, I'm going to talk to them, and if we like what we see, we'll hire them. Advertise the job. Go to LinkedIn or use the Village to Village network. Here in the DC area, we also have the Washington Area Village Exchange, which is, I think, 1/4 of the villages in the United States, or about 1/4 of the villages in the US, are in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, which is pretty astounding statistic. But we've got WAVE, and we can advertise jobs there. It may not be, you may not get any candidates, but VTV and WAVE don't cost us anything. LinkedIn costs us a little bit. And even if we had somebody that was a local candidate who came forward, as was the case when we hired our current executive director, we still went to LinkedIn, and the executive committee went through reviewing applications, and we went through 2 rounds of interviews with candidates. You can use networks. We consulted with At Home in Alexandria and Arlington Village when we were going through our last transition. If they had potential candidates, they may not, but they might. They may have somebody who is on their staff who's executive director material, but the current executive director is not leaving and wants to encourage, someone else's career advancement. Like I mentioned earlier, our executive committee served as the committee to do all of the recruitment process. And we rated and ranked the candidates. Then we checked references. That's really important. You can ask for the references when you start to interview. You don't need, there are pros and cons to asking for references with an application. I think it's good not to spook somebody to say, well, you're going to start calling my references right away. But you check the references after you've notified the candidate that you're going to be calling their references. You don't just cold call them and someone is surprised to say, oh, I didn't know you were leaving. And then all of this is confidential until an offer is made and accepted. At that point, what are you looking for when it comes to an executive director? A lot of people are looking for somebody that works with seniors. And what we do is we basically patterned our selection factors, our recruitment factors, along organizational skills, social and personal skills, what experience they had in communication and marketing, good computer skills. In this day and age, you need somebody that is extremely savvy with the Microsoft Office suite, with various databases, if possible. Experience and knowledge. Have they managed before? It could be, somebody that's managed a major fundraiser for a local school. It doesn't have to be, an executive director who has pulled off 5 consecutive highly successful galas. Do they have financial experience? Meaning, doesn't mean that they're an accountant. It doesn't mean that they're a systems person, but it means that they understand, income and expenses. They understand accounting and an accounting report. They hopefully know how to read a profit and loss statement or a balance sheet. And then if they've got nonprofit experience, either working for a nonprofit or they've served in a governance capacity with a nonprofit. Have they served on a committee? Have they been a board member? One of the things that we have is for recruiting our board members, we have a matrix of skills and experience that we would like our board members to have. And so one of the things we look for in our board directors is always having somebody that has served as an attorney somewhere. If we can find somebody that has done marketing, we do that. Somebody that served in senior healthcare, we're looking for those kinds of things for our board members to bring that experience and that perspective. You may, if you can find somebody as your ED that has experience with care of seniors and aging, that is an interesting perspective. And then they need to have a knowledge of the demographics of your geographic area. One of the things that we experienced when we did our recruitment over a year ago was we had people applying from, other geographic locations. And part of it, they'll say, well, I'll relocate for the job, or, my spouse is moving there. We had one candidate who was extremely highly qualified in that situation. But it's very hard to come into a village which has a very defined area. So we're the southeast corner of Fairfax County. There's Alexandria, Arlington, across the river. There are so many villages in DC itself. But having a knowledge of Northern Virginia is extremely helpful. Having a knowledge of Alexandria, whether it's the city of Alexandria or the part of Alexandria that is where I live in Fairfax County, which is where our village is located, it's important. It would be very hard for somebody to come in from another state unless they have been used to jumping into jobs that are new and new challenges. I'm sorry, I'm doing this myself. And okay, so when, sorry. Okay, how do you get from point A to point B? You can name a current staff member as an interim or acting executive director. Your staff may be very small. It may not have anybody that would have that kind of experience. And you assume that that person is going to not only do the job that they are currently doing, but they're going to assume new responsibilities. If it's a paid position and you do go through designating an acting staff member as your acting ED, you might want to consider a temporary salary increase or a bonus, and that would be very appropriate. What are the pros to that? The person knows your organization. They have a comfort level with everything, and they know your members. That is extremely important because members get very concerned when EDs transfer over. And seniors are, and we all know as people age, they're more resistant to change. And over the last couple of years, we have had that change happen in our own village. We have done a lot of outreach to our members to say we are well. We have an acting ED, and I was serving in that capacity because I had that experience, and that we are doing a quality search to find the appropriate person. One of the disadvantages to that is an acting ED from the staff has their own job. They may not want to assume the ED role. And if they do, it could be perceived as a pre-selection. That would only be an issue probably in a village that has a much larger staff. You could hire an interim executive director. There are a lot of people out there who are in the business of serving as interim EDs. They have been an ED in another organization and they market themselves to do that. And it's always on a paid basis. There are pros to that. They've got experience. It's a body, so staff's not having to assume the void and the functions that the ED has been performing, but they might not be a good fit. I've got experience with another nonprofit where the acting ED was hired on contract. It's not a good fit for the organization. It wasn't good for personality. It wasn't good in terms of that person's expectations as to what they would do. And another thing was they had a compensation level that they said, okay, pay me that level, and using my hourly rate, I will give you so many hours. So you may have been getting 30, 35 hours from your ED, and let's say the compensation was $45,000. The new person comes in and says, well, my hourly rate's $100 an hour. They may then be giving you 10 hours a week. So you need to understand all of that. So hiring an interim is probably not appropriate for a small village, but I wanted to throw it out there as an option. Okay, so board member can also serve. I did this. I had governance experience, and I stepped in twice in the last 3 years to do that. I had governance experience as a board member on other nonprofits, but as having been an executive director of a 501c3, I basically knew how nonprofits work and had that experience. I was not compensated, so we saved money in terms of our checkbook, but there are pros and cons to it. If it is a board member, they know the organization, they know the knowledge, but they may not be willing to give the time. They may have other commitments, and they may not have the time to do that. But for us, it worked. And so a lot of that has to do with timing, the composition of your board, and the nature of what they're being asked to do. So we already talked a little bit about our matrix on board members: nonprofit, governance, office, personnel management, legal, finances, banking. We try to have a mix on our board of members of our village, some volunteers, some community representatives, and then we also stagger the terms of our board members. So hiring an ED, I'm trying to keep a lookout, Barbara, at the clock.
And tell me when you want me to interrupt you.
Okay, we're getting close, I think.
No problem.
Prepare an offer of employment. You need to do a background check. We pay to have that done, financial and personal, what their compensation is, what the workload is, work schedule is, and the start date. They may ask about, working from home, or if you have an office, then you get that letter signed. The board president signs it, board chair signs it, and then the new ED signs it as well. You need to be prepared. Back when I was starting off, any job offer, you didn't even ask. Almost, you didn't ask what the salary was. You didn't ask how many days of vacation. Can I have every other Friday off? Can I work from home? We were just so glad to get a job offer. And now it's a new world. People are looking for benefits. They're looking for working at home. They're working for a sliding work schedule. So it's a new world, and you need to be prepared for that. When you announce your new ED, the executive committee briefs the board, then the staff, then all of the members and the volunteers, other stakeholders, and then issues a press release. And again, remember, it's a unified message. You control the message. Don't be overly selective, but don't settle either. There's a growth opportunity for everybody in a new position. No one's going to hit the ground running. You're not replacing the person that walked out the door. You're hiring a new person, and it will be a new era for your organization. Okay, you on board, everything's done, the background checks are complete. They sign a conflict of interest statement. We have confidentiality and non-solicitation agreements. You do the W-2s. And as we previously mentioned, position description is in place on day one, and you develop the performance plan to be in place within the first 30 days. So you can start working on that when you're in that interim period. Then you start with orientation. When RED Sarah came on board, we had to do all of the various topics, and I had an orientation plan, and I had topics thrown on a piece of paper. You basically go through all of the legal stuff. All of us have registrations with our state corporation commission. We all have our 501c3 status with the IRS and our tax exempt certificates. If you have paid staff, you have the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you're at the federal level in your Department of Labor filing at your state level. You then need to start changing the signatures on bank accounts, investments. This means taking off the departed ED and incorporating any changes in your board signatories and getting those done. This is a painful process, I have to warn you. It takes appointments and lots of paperwork. And ever since the banking crisis, it is even more complicated to change names on accounts, take people off and add names, but it has to be done. We have a specific procedure that we wrote on how to change signatories at Wells Fargo and how to change signatories at Burke and Herbert, our two banks. And then if there's any grant that you have, any signatories on that, and then whatever credit cards the executive director has access to needs to be addressed. Budget and finance is probably the place where you need to spend the most time. You have them review the federal tax return, have them look at the bank in investment accounts over time, all the credit card accounts, profit and loss statements they should be reading, not just the last one, but go back and look at ones in the past, what the balance sheet was a year ago, any other financial reports you have. One of the things that we started in our village was trend analysis. We have plotted cumulative income and cumulative expenses by month over the past few years. So we know whether we're trending the same or trending in a different way. Fundraisers. Fundraisers are fun. There's a lot of work, but for somebody to walk in the door and pull off a fundraiser that is a gala or a typical cyclical event, it could be an Oktoberfest, it could be any other special occasion. What the nature of it is, the timelines, the action plans, the attendance that you had, who came, who didn't come, and what your budget and revenue was, and an assessment of the workload involved. The donor trends and the list of donors. The ED should be working to contact members over time, gradually, and should be setting up appointments and phone calls with key donors and key sponsors. You need to have all the contracts listed, going over what the services are, the length of time of the contract, any conditions, are there cancellation clauses, are there performance clauses. An orientation of the accounting system means you know that your accounting system is there, and whether it's being done on contract or in-house, whether it's QuickBooks, you need to just go in and look at it and see it. Doesn't mean you are an expert on an accounting system. It doesn't mean the ED actually does the accounting. And then if you've got payroll, familiarity with whatever your payroll system is. Okay, Village 101 bylaws. It's really important that they know the bylaws are there. What the geographic boundaries are, the demographics of your members and your volunteers, membership levels by category, if that's it, knowing how many are singles, how many are households, what your due structure is, services provided. Do you have programs? What are the schedules of those programs? Do you have special events? Do you provide transportation? Do you provide IT support? And we monitor, we actually collect statistics now on attendance over the course of the year. Obviously, you meet and greet the staff. You start to meet the members and the volunteers. You go out and meet people in the community. We have county government here, so we have a supervisor, getting to meet the supervisor and his or her staff and other nonprofits in the area, because we're not competing with those nonprofits, but we are in terms of our mission, but we're competing with those other nonprofits in terms of donors. And then any contractors that you have, including that very valuable legal counsel. Okay, other topics, grant access, reviewing all the office procedures, understanding what equipment you've gotten and how it works. Calendar of events over the course of the year. What are the things that happen every month on a particular schedule? What are the things that happen on December 1st? On February 1st, you may be finalizing your accounting for the prior fiscal year and getting ready to provide information to the firm that prepares your federal tax return. Okay, my voice is starting to go, so bear with me. getting involved with other villages. With Village to Village, Mount Vernon and Home is a member. We're a member of the Washington Area Village Exchange, and we belong to the Mount Vernon Lee Chamber of Commerce. So getting all those contacts in place. And then going back and reading newsletters and any other email blasts or things that were sent to the members. You basically, there's a balance. You flood your new ED with information, and a lot of it's going to stick, but you just kind of say it's overwhelming at the beginning, but your learning curve will accelerate very quickly. Okay, so my personal experience, when I left the federal government, when I left Navy and went to state, I did a core dump on everything. When I left the Entomological Society of America, because you could Google me, we hired an interim executive director to replace me as the board was stepping back and saying, okay, we've survived the hard times. We've got money in the bank. We have a staff that works. We sold our office building and we're now renting, and we're in a much more stable financial environment, but we need a different strategic direction in terms of marketing. Well, I was leaving anyway to accept another position. So the board basically said, we're gonna take a new direction. They hired, on my recommendation, they hired an interim, and she was there for 2 months, and she and I spent my last 3 weeks there with her in my office. Long hours. The last day I was there, I put in a lot more hours. I was there till 8 o'clock at night, and I was like, hey, it's time to leave. But doing the action plan, having the accountability that we mentioned before of getting projects completed and getting things staged for the future. And then it's all about transition. You continue to do your work, and you just brief people and meet and brief and meet and brief and meet. And it was, every day was a little bit of the touching the people that worked for me. Hiring a new ED, have your ducks in order, develop the action plan. Don't rush the process, don't compromise. But it's better to have a very good candidate than an expeditious one. Okay, I'm going to skip before we talk about.
Yeah, we're going to need about 10 minutes for questions,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
At the end of the presentation, and you'll have access to this, I've got samples in here. So the first sample is the start of a letter of offer of employment. The second one talks about compensation and benefits. The third one is the terms and conditions. And then I've got information on confidentiality statements and non-compete statements. So going back, be prepared, be creative, be thorough, be patient, and we're now going to open it up to questions and answers. And I guess we can, I'm going to unshare.
Well, actually,
No, I don't think I
you
can.
never shared, but that's okay. And when you started talking, I was like, oh, well, maybe she's talking at first, but you know what?
Did
Paula's
everybody
done an incredible PowerPoint, and we will share it with you. But
did you all see it?
No.
Oh my God, you should have said something.
I didn't realize until halfway through.
Oh, I am so sorry.
But I think you did a great job. Are you kidding?
No,
I mean,
I am so sorry, because I figured you were reading it as I was.
I didn't realize it until after that you decided not to do it. I didn't know when.
Oh, I am so sorry, folks.
But you know what? It's actually good, because Paula, I think you were very thorough on a lot of levels. I think the documents that people are really going to be interested in you sharing are the offer letters and some of the other stuff that really is support documents that I think people will need to look at, as well as, the strategies, the government strategies, or your governance strategies. I'm
so sorry. There were cute little cartoons along the way, and
I'm sorry I didn't. I just you can pull it up right now and just go through them real fast if you want.
Okay. This is what you should have been seeing. There's the start. I am so sorry. I just thought, because I was skipping so much. This is what it looked like. And then here are the samples at the end. Okay, so I'm gonna unshare. Assuming, yeah, I don't know how to unshare. Okay,
Just stop share.
you know, it's not coming up, Barbara, like it usually does. Anyway, okay, so I think, Barbara, there were some questions in the
There
chat.
were two questions. Well, one, Jacqueline from Next 50, Next Village in San Francisco mentioned, and Jacqueline, you might want to verify, Dashlane. What is that? I haven't heard of that.
Dashlane is a password protection platform. So two of us have the master password, but all of our employees put any passwords they create. We use so many different platforms, but all of their passwords go into Dashlane along with their login. So for example, we had an employee just leave, so I can access all of any accounts that she had. I can find her login and her
Oh, fabulous.
Is that spelled DASHLING?
LANE, Dashlane. Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
it stores, I mean, you can go right to the websites that you are interested. You just go to Dashlane and, say you want to go to Zoom. Your Zoom account is in there and it'll take you directly to the website without all the logins. But at any rate, that's a place to store it. And we use that, all of us use that. And then our treasurer also has access to it. So if we're all, if we all disappear one day, somebody from the board has the master as well. Beyond that, if you don't mind, I'm going to just mention, it is a little tricky when you're a small nonprofit to have access to, who's going to handle the payroll, where do we go for our HR questions. So we're using Mineral right now for HR, and that's an online platform, but you can actually get a person there to help you. We had an issue with medical leave. California law is tricky all the time. And so I didn't want to just trust my own interpretation of the law on this matter. It's too serious. So we went through Mineral, and you can get a lot of HR help from them. And then the other thing we use is Gusto, and they just manage our payroll and our, all of our employees when they request sick leave, vacation time. It tracks all of that automatically, and it generates payroll automatically unless you're an hourly employee. But so those are three platforms that we use to help keep us organized.
So Jacqueline, those are good to know. Jacqueline, would you put those in the chat?
Certainly.
And that would be helpful for everybody, especially me, VTV, I'm very curious about, the Gusto, especially because we use ADP, but I'd be open to other suggestions, especially when it comes to HR, issues.
Barbara, that's so good to hear you say that, because we were just starting to explore ADP. So it's nice to hear that there's something else to also look at.
ADP has been really good. I'm going to give a plug real fast. We went through the, oh God, what's it called? The CARES Act, the payroll, and then the employment reduction. They did all the filing for us. And so we got it, through them. That you can't get somebody on the phone. It's impossible to, if you have an HR question. So that's the deficit. But I've been very, very happy with their taxes, they do everything. And yes, Jacqueline, just like you, I have to do the manual hourly, but the payroll's processed. I don't have to deal with it. If everybody knows me, well, I am not the finance person. Thank God I have Betsy and other people who know QuickBooks, but they didn't hire me for that. They hired me for my good looks.
I also understand that QuickBooks has a payroll module in it, and we use QuickBooks for our accounting. So we're going to investigate.
Oh, that's good to know.
Moving to QuickBooks. I went my sister village.
Yes, we use QuickBooks now for payroll, but that's all it does. I mean, we started to consider whether we want to start providing some benefits to our staff as we mature. So that's why we started exploring ADP, because
it's something I want to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was ED at Mount Vernon Home, we were using Paychex, which was a nightmare. Sorry if anybody's using it, but it was,
I think the thing to do when you're looking at those platforms is make sure that they have a chat feature, right, and that you can call them,
right,
and that they will call you back quickly. And you know, so we have like an employee handbook. It's that platform. There's no one to help you when you have to, you know, it keeps all of our legal regulation, everything updated as far as, you know, what we have to offer. But it's called Think Builder, I think.
Mhm.
I prefer companies that have a chat that will actually help you. They get back to you in 24 hours.
Yeah,
So-
same with VTV. They're pretty good, but chat wise.
I
Um,
think
you
it's called Think HR, or I don't know,
So
something.
just my last tiny comment on this, because I'm not sure where we're supposed to be going as a group. We called ADP because we were going to, you know, we pushed the buttons for new customer. They called back very quickly. If you're talking about being a new customer.
Yeah,
Of course. Judy asked, you know, their executive committee apparently reviewed, and Judy, maybe you want to ask the question, but the question was, what happens when the executive director is no longer needed? So I don't know if you want to qualify that and tell me.
We had a variety of staff coming and going, part-time, full-time. The executive committee has spent about 4 months doing the actual work and have decided we don't really need an executive director, or we think we don't. One full-time employee and one part-time employee we think will do with getting the members more engaged. Will suffice.
So
Okay.
we're just having a chat, a conversation, and I apologize because I'm late joining. The way, you know, we have a membership of about 350 people. So we have a large membership. It's very transactional in terms of giving rides and fulfilling services. We have great services and events and classes and stuff from the county. So we don't necessarily have to replicate all that here. But one of the things I find with our relatively small staff, which is 3 people, is that as the executive director, I can be more externally focused in terms of fundraising, finding grants, creating partnerships. And our member services manager is more internally focused, making sure that, you know, we bring on the new members are processed, we bring them on, we make connections between members and volunteers. You know, she's talking to prospective members all the time. So there's an inside-outside difference between us that are completely different roles, is what I've found.
Yeah, we've been working starting pre-COVID on strengthening our committees and the chairs to do a lot of that kind of work. Another glitch is we had some significant outside funding that helped pay for the executive director, and that is gone. So the finances it's not a matter of just replacing because we just don't have the funding.
Right.
And Judy, that was the point I made about how stable is your funding
Right.
and historically in the trend analysis. There was one question I saw. Our village is 13 years old and we have 140 members-ish right now. We had peaked in the 170s a few years ago, but we have had the demographics of our village. We've had a huge turnover. Just between April and July of this year, we had 8 new members and 7 departures. And a lot of the newer members that are joining are significantly older. They're now the age of our founders, who are now moving into their late 80s and early 90s. And so we basically need paid staff. It'd be really hard for us to have a volunteer serving as our CEO. And I believe that in unpaid ED, and we're doing our best to live within our resources.
And you know what, that's a trend, you know, just hosting these mentor groups and the feral members, you know, webinar that Capitol Hill does for us at the network level. We're hearing that a lot. We're having a lot of chatter about people waiting until they absolutely need services instead of having a plan of action as you age. And so they're joining, and it's not unlike some of our counterparts in the housing industry where people are going into assisted living almost too late. They're nursing home, level of care. And the transition for Paula, for Mount Vernon Home, and for many of the villages that are mature villages, is how to care for those older, members. Another whole conversation, separately, but, we're finding, especially in the DC market, they have shared social workers. They're being creative as far as how to do that continuum. And I know that your new executive director just started, but she's really, and I've been watching since I'm still on the board, her outreach, which I think is a huge part of what an executive director needs to embrace. I mean, when I jumped into Mount Vernon Home, I came from the corporate world, not the nonprofit world. So it's a difference in mentality. And like you said, in that Northern Virginia region, you're competing with the dollars, not just donations, I should say, also the grant monies that are local and countywide. So it's a challenge. It's somebody who needs to be very savvy on that end. Somebody did mention, Paula, that the slides were really great, but your presentation was awesome. So just wanted to let you know that.
Oh, sorry. I just thought you were reading along with me.
No, you did great. See,
The but the recording will just be audio then, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But we share all the documents, which is the best part. No, you were perfect, because you know what? I think we all listened to what you had to say. The only thing, and I know we have to go in a minute, the only thing we didn't touch on, or you didn't touch on, is the employee versus the contractual ED. And that's always been chatter over the years. I have a contract with my village. I'm not an employee. I'm an independent contractor. If anybody has words of wisdom, if you are, in a position to say plus or minus, that'd be great to hear some conversation on that.
We definitely have contractor consultants, and we have people who are 10, 15, or 20 hours a week. We don't bring them on as part-time employees. We bring them on as contractor consultants. They do work somewhat independent. I mean, like any good employee, they work independently. They know what they need to get done, and they get it done, and they run things by you for review and approval. But one of the things we don't pay benefits, so it's just an hourly rate. We have to adjust the hourly rate a little bit to make up for, I think we recently adjusted it because of, the FICA or Social Security tax, whatever it is, that would be an employee benefit, the employer would pay. We upped the rate so that they got the equivalent of the employer contribution. But in terms of the work, to me, there's no real difference, especially in the environment we're in, where people are teleworking. In the old days,
Right.
It used to be, are you in the office or not in the office? Now, having our consultants teleworking and doing Zoom and doing email, it works out perfectly for us, especially for people who aren't full-time.
Well, I know that we're out of time and we have to go back to the main room. But I want to thank everybody for coming on this, and especially Paula for putting the presentation together. It was, living through it. And as Paula had mentioned, when I left in 2018, there were 3 EDs after me. And it was a very tough time to watch the organization I love struggle to find the niche and to do that succession. So your presentation was spot on. And we have a great ED who's leading the way, and all the nuances, I have to say, of looking back and knowing, and it hits home, Paula, really, especially in the metropolitan area, that you have to be part of the community to understand the community. And that's really, that may just be unique for our, perspective, and we're getting the nudge from Steve, so I'll end there. But thank you all for joining us. And if, just make sure you,
My contact information, my email is on the presentation at the end if you want it.
yeah, and we will definitely share that.
And again,
Make
valid-
sure that if you leave the room, but not the meeting, you're going to go back, you'll have an option, but unless you want to go and have lunch. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.